We're outside the Judiciary Committee here in the Dirksen Senate Office Building, where the committee is about to consider the nomination of Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, senator from Alabama, to be Trump's Attorney General. Now, a key development has made today's events basically a fait accompli. Earlier this morning, Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican chairman, suspended rules that require a quorum, in other words, require Democrats to show up for a hearing in order for there to be a vote. He suspended those rules because Democrats have been boycotting throughout the week, saying that the nominees, Steve Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary and Tom Price for HHS, had basically lied to the committee and withholding financial information around conflicts of interest, and that Tom Price needed to be investigated for some potential insider trading. Democrats were trying to hold that up, but Republicans had a card to play. They suspended the rules, moved them through the committee, and now they're going to the floor for a full vote. That will allow Republicans here, whether or not Democrats show up, to move Jeff Sessions through and to the floor. Back here is this is the line of the public that wants to go in to watch the hearing. That right through this door is where the vote is going to be held. Members of the media can go in and out, but if you're in the public, you have to get here early and line up. Earlier today, a significant number of maybe 4 or 5 members of Code Pink were in line. They were able to get in.
They voted to support a man who will not protect the vulnerable. That's why we have laws. We don't need laws to protect those in power. We need laws to protect the vulnerable. Women who have been abused. We need laws to protect people from Islamic countries.
The issue of the day here on Capitol Hill, besides Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, will be whether or not Democrats can mount a sufficient resistance to Neil Gorsuch, who was the Supreme Court nominee named by Donald Trump last night. Last night, there were about 5,000 protesters in front of Chuck Schumer's office in Brooklyn. Later that evening, and I don't think it was necessarily a coincidence, Schumer announced that, yes, Democrats would be filibustering and a 60-vote threshold would be required. So the question no longer is, are Democrats going to filibuster? The question is actually a more complicated one. It is, do Democrats want the filibuster to remain? Let's say that Democrats are able to hold all 48 of their senators and vote against moving forward on a vote on Gorsuch. What Mitch McConnell will do immediately is go to the nuclear option. He will change the Senate rules so that you no longer are allowed to filibuster Supreme Court nominees. I spoke with a number of Republican senators yesterday. All of them said that option was on the table, but they wanted to wait and see what Democrats did. The Republican preference at the moment is for enough moderate Democrats to cave, so they don't need to do that. Now, there may be one thing that progressives want to think about when they're making this decision, and I don't have an opinion one way or the other on what the right direction to go is. But a lot of people have said, well, so what if Mitch McConnell blows up the filibuster? You know, who cares? We're going to get rid of it eventually. One thing to remember is that if Mitch McConnell lifts up the hood and starts tinkering with Senate rules in order to change the threshold on Supreme Court nominees from 60 to 50, I wouldn't be surprised if that's not the only rule that he changes when he goes in there. Right now, there are a lot of privileges that a minority has, that Democrats have as the minority, that could allow them to hold up different legislation. They could hold up nominees, allow them to drag out the process for an almost an indefinite period of time. Which Mitch McConnell used himself when he was in the minority. If you want to read more on that, go Google Adam Gentelson's column in the Washington Post recently. He was the deputy chief of staff for Harry Reid. He explains a lot of the minutia of what Senate Democrats could do if they wanted to fully obstruct the Trump agenda. If Mitch McConnell goes in to change the filibuster rules around the Supreme Court, while he's in there, he could change a bunch of these other rules if that's what he decides to do. And so if Democrats give him the opportunity to do that, he very well might take it. So it might still be the right move, but it's worth knowing what the Republican move could be.
Kevin Kennedy has posted several comments complaining that Democrats were very supportive of these kinds of appointees when Obama was president, and only now that they're...
That Democrats were?
He's saying Democrats are being hypocritical about these procedures and whether Senate decorum is to allow a president to have the cabinet that he wishes, a Supreme Court justice he wishes.
The Senate would not be able to function if it weren't for hypocrisy. Your position on process depends upon whether or not you're in the majority or in the minority. There are a handful of senators who when they're in the majority, are still supportive of the filibuster, or when they're in the minority, are opposed to filibuster reform. There are some of those, and they're called institutionalists. But say 10, 20 years ago, institutionalists kind of dominated here in the Senate. But as the parties have split, as they've gone from kind of regional parties where you had liberal Republicans and you had conservative Democrats, and so you had a lot of alliances forming and reforming on different issues. We don't have that anymore. We have a much more partisan Senate, and so therefore you have a much more kind of convenient process approach. Like if you're in the majority, then you're willing to make a certain decision that you wouldn't be willing to make in the minority. So absolutely, you can go back in time and find senators supporting on principle every particular type of process issue.
Russell Beach wants to know if there's precedent. Has this ever happened before?
The boycotting. I was asking around. I have not heard of a minority party boycotting nominees in order to prevent a quorum from taking place. However, the idea of not showing up and boycotting a hearing or boycotting a floor vote or otherwise trying to stall it does certainly have plenty of precedent. I have not been able to find a precedent for it happening on nominees.
Amy Smith says the longer they stall, the less they can pass that agenda.
That's what Republicans think that Democrats are up to, and Democrats are certainly thinking the same thing. That's what Mitch McConnell tried to do when he was in the minority. The idea is that time is the most precious resource in the Senate, and because of these procedural privileges that the minority has that I referred to earlier, it takes forever to do anything. If you want to do a piece of legislation, you've got to file for cloture, and then you got to wait a day. Then you've got to have a cloture vote, and then you've got to wait another day for it to ripen. Then you've got to have then you have to wait another day, and eventually it can take up to like 7 days to get past a single piece of legislation if Democrats withhold unanimous consent and take advantage of every opportunity that they have to slow things down. There are hundreds of nominees that Trump wants to get through. Each nominee requires an 8-hour period of debate, and if Democrats could require that 8 hours. If you multiply 8 by all of these hundreds of nominees, it's true that there becomes no time on the floor to do some of the things that are in Trump's agenda.
Voter fraud is a crime, and of course prosecutors should prosecute crime. And it's interesting. The dissonance, folks in the media love repeating what the Democrats say on voter fraud. But if you look at the Democrats' arguments on voter fraud, they're utterly inconsistent. They say there's no voter fraud whatsoever, but goodness gracious, please don't prosecute voter fraud.
I just hope that they stop, think this through, and quit being obnoxious people in the rooms.
Obnoxious people?
Yeah, they're pretty obnoxious.
So there's been a few comments, I didn't get their names, referring to the Ku Klux Klan and the Ku Klux Klan in association with Jeff Sessions. How fair is that, and what is the concern, what is the fear if he is confirmed?
Right, so Jeff Sessions and the Klan, a lot of this comes from a comment that he was reported to have made where he said he was okay with the Klan until he learned that they smoked weed. Kind of a joke that he was telling. But that's a kind of an insider joke that you would kind of only tell if you had some type of, or you believed that your audience had some sympathy already with the Klan. Now, Jeff Sessions' response, which is factual, is that during his time as a prosecutor in Alabama, he targeted the Klan, and that he doesn't harbor the Klan, but his record on race is well known, and I would encourage people to look that up. And there are real reasons that people take that comment and believe that it kind of meant what it said. The first time that voting rights were truly extended in a way that shook up the political landscape was right after the Civil War and during Reconstruction. And the result of extending the franchise to freed slaves down in the South was that Democrats were swept out of office. Democrats at the time were the party of the Klan and of white supremacy. And so over the next 10 years or so, there was a kind of terrorist campaign that pushed back against it. And when Jim Crow came in order to restrict the franchise, they threw up all sorts of different hoops. Like the literacy tests were the most famous of them, and a literacy test isn't exactly what you think. It's not like everybody got the same test and it said, can you read this? It would say, if you were a white Democratic voter and you came in, they would just let you vote and say, oh, I know Chuck, he's literate. If you were a freed slave that came in to vote, they'd say, recite the Constitution by memory. And if you missed one word, they'd say, well, I'm sorry, you're not literate. You can't vote. The other was a poll tax. We're the only industrialized country in the world that has that has both a democracy and these types of restrictions around voting, and they come directly from that legacy. And the intent has always been the same: to restrict the votes of poor people and people of color. And Jeff Sessions has both pursued that agenda, and he has also targeted activists who have been doing voting rights work. So that the lineage there is quite clear.